Oklahoma Sooners offensive line coach Bill Bedenbaugh was quite complimentary of his true freshman offensive lineman. We'll discuss that coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you once again for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there tuning in. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you go check out our interview with Luke Wilson, the Oklahoma Sooners' first 2027 recruiting class commitment, the offensive tackle out of South Lake Carroll. Had some great things to say about Oklahoma and why he decided to go ahead and pull the trigger on his commitment ahead of his junior season. Let's talk about a couple other offensive linemen. Bill Bedenbaugh was quite complimentary when he met with the media on Monday when he talked about Michael Fasusi and Ryan Fodje.
Yeah, George Stoya of Sooner Scoop asked him about the freshmen and you know, how did he feel about them? And he basically flat out said he's the best he's had on his roster at that age. And for him, when it comes to wanting to play, it has nothing to do with, you know, big plays or anything like that. It's all about consistency. And he talked about those guys are pretty consistent. That's pretty huge to hear.
Yeah.
Especially because we know that the way that Bill Bedenbaugh coaches, he wants guys that, you know, play in and play out are going to do exactly what they need to do in order to win. And, you know, make sure not only they're successful, make sure the entire line is successful. And so to hear that you've got a couple of guys that he feels like he's getting to the point where he can truly trust, it's huge for this team going forward, because now that means that at their, as we know at their size, they're pretty big dudes. So we expect them to be able to actually get some run, but that gets you even more excited because at some point they may fight and find their way on the field. They were both top 10 players in their position nationally. So I like hearing that.
Even if it's not this year, if it's next year that they're starting for you along the offensive line, that's okay. You've got a really strong trajectory with both of these guys. And if they're not starting this year, I think that's a good sign, because that means that Jacob Sexton is doing what he needs to do to play a quality left tackle, and that Eddie Pierre-Louis and Fabetchi Wiwu are doing a good job playing the interior guard positions. Like, it's not a bad thing if neither of these true freshmen are starting. I think it's a good thing. It means the rest of your offensive line is stepping up, because the sky is the limit for these kids. Michael Fasusi and Ryan Fodje both have big-time NFL prospects because they move really, really well. They're strong. They're smart. They're about their business. Like, they work. They put in the work. They wouldn't be where they're at today if they haven't been putting in the work for the last 8 months, because there's a lot of offensive linemen that come through with high ceilings and big time potential, but they don't advance this quickly to be in the mix for rotational snaps on Bill Bedenbaugh's offensive line unless they've done the work to make themselves more consistent. So it's encouraging, at least, to know that these two guys are going to be in the mix for rotational snaps at least, and are going to continue to push the veterans on the roster. And that's what you want. You want your young guys coming up, pushing everybody else, and competing for a starting opportunity. And if they don't get it, that's no slight against them. It just means that everybody else raised their game, and they're going to have the advantage because guys like Jacob Sexton have been in the program for 4 years. Fabetchi Wiwu is in his second year in the program. They know what to expect, and they know how to operate at the collegiate level, as Fasusi and Fodje are kind of still getting their feet wet a little bit. But it's exciting, at least, to know that Bill Bedenbaugh is confident that they're going to get significant playing time this year.
Yeah, especially with, you know, the questions we have around the offensive line. You want to hear about players that the coach trusts, and that's another player that they trust. They trust that that both of them are capable of picking things up and are ready to play. So you know that, you know, was a Fasusi got some run with the ones during the scrimmage. That was one note that came out, as well as you saw a little Fodje rotating in as well for Fabetchi Wiwu. So they're getting some good burn, let's put it that way, when it comes to practicing with the ones and twos. So you're starting to see them, and So at some point later in the season, you'll probably hear about them actually playing more. Now we're starting to get healthier. You're starting to see some of the offensive linemen that were out in the spring with shoulder procedures or whatnot. They're starting to actually get some play too. So there should be a strong rotation on the offensive line going into game 1 and game 2. To me, after Michigan kind of tells me what the offensive line is going to look like, because that's when you can kind of see what the health is truly going to be. But I like the fact that we've got 2 offensive linemen that are freshmen that we feel we truly can trust and can throw out there and be okay with it.
Yeah, absolutely. You want a number of guys that the offensive line coach trusts. And he also mentioned guys like Heath, Ozaeta, and Logan Howland, and talked about how missing the spring is kind of rough. It's hard. And he equated it to Creed Humphrey when he missed the spring going into his sophomore season and how that kind of set him back a little bit. And we all know how great Creed is. And so we talked about maybe working Heath, Ozaeta, and Logan Howland in a little bit slowly, but was very complimentary of them from Monday's practice, saying that they had their best day so far in fall camp and put together a really good practice. So that's encouraging for those guys because, you know, with Derek Simmons out, with Jake Taylor out, with Jacob Sexton out, Logan Howland was playing a lot of tackle in the scrimmage on Saturday. And after missing a lot of the spring due to the shoulder surgery, he's kind of catching up now. And if he can trend in a positive direction towards the start of the season, that's a really good sign for where he's at in his development, because again, it's a developmental game. The guy that we saw against Ole Miss isn't the same guy that we're seeing today, or that Bill Bedenbaugh is even seeing today. So it's encouraging that a lot of these guys along the offensive line are showing positive progression in their developmental timeline with Oklahoma. Now it just all has to come together. And I hope for Oklahoma's sake that by Illinois State, we know who the starting 5 is, and then we know who the rotational guys are, because I want to see that 5 really get at least a half together of game action before they go play Michigan. You know what I mean? Because you want to have that cohesion and that chemistry and that communication settled. And thankfully, they got a veteran center in Troy Everett that's going to help them. But you want to kind of have the rest of it figured out before you have to go play a really daunting Michigan front.
Yeah, if we weren't talking about Bill Bedenbaugh, I'd totally be in agreement with you there, but he likes to tinker.
He is a tinkerer. I get it. I just don't want it like being the Auburn game with Texas a couple weeks later that we're still trying to figure out what the offensive line is. You know what I mean?
In which, you know, and I agree with you there. The good thing is that he has some experience with these offensive linemen. So he kind of has an idea of who can do what. That's why this year, in comparison to last year, in actual game scenarios, he's seen Heath, Ozaeta. He saw a little bit of EPL, and I think the EPL figured things out. Remember, he wasn't in spring last year, so he didn't come into the summer, so that's why he was a little bit behind getting things down. But he got to see a lot of the players that are there. So I think the comfort zone for BB is there for majority of the players. But the freshman making him just as comfortable, to me, that's a very big, that's a testament to how good they are more than anything, is if they can get in there and get him to actually be like, oh yeah, I can throw him out there on the field.
Yeah. And we knew
he don't do that.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't just throw freshmen on the field unless he has to. I mean, Caden Green was a guy that got worked into a spot sometime just before the Red River Showdown, or he might have gotten his first start in the Red River Showdown, if I can't remember exactly, but we know how critical of a role he played in that game and then over the second half of the season. But if you have veterans that have time in the program and some game experience that can lead the way along the offensive line, I think it just creates a little bit more trust. But again, Fodje and Fasusi, man, they're so talented that it wouldn't surprise me in the least if they ended up becoming starters at some point this season, and not due to injury, just because they're going to be hard to keep off the field. And that's also an okay thing too. This is what competition's supposed to be, right? The competitive depth is pushing everybody. So yeah, there it is. I got you. I said it just for you, Jay. I knew you needed a little bit of hydration, so I was going to hook you up on that front. The Oklahoma Sooners, man, they missed out on another blue chip wide receiver prospect. We'll discuss that coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.